What is going on, you beautiful humans? It seems that the rumors aren't going to go away, and many of us are frustratingly waiting for the M1X Mac. And I want to make sure that you know that you don't have to apologize for this. But I also want to be clear on what that means about the apology, because there really are two sides. And of course, feel free to just listen into this one in the background if you'd like. But either way, we should have this chat. And so we're all adults here, and at least according to my analytics, although I do have the occasional group of teenagers watching this because for whatever reason, they haven't yet figured out that I'm not cool anymore. But that being said, this is your time and your money, and you're waiting because one, maybe you are in an industry where those proposed 8 power cores and 2 efficiency cores is what you need to get that work done. Or if you're into 3D modeling or working with massively complex codecs from cinema cameras, transcoding, and working in multiple layered timelines that look as if you're actually trying to decipher genetic code and you don't want to necessarily live in Final Cut Pro, then I could see this. And most of you at that level, however, are likely using a PC anyway, although props to Premiere Pro for recently Adobe for releasing and optimizing for Apple Silicon. But also those of you that are working with Blackmagic Raw and in DaVinci, and I can also understand why this next iteration makes more sense for you. And of course, the ability to upgrade that RAM beyond the current 16 gigabytes. And 2, maybe you want more displays for either the Mini or the MacBook lineup that only offers up the built-in display specifically for the MacBook along with just one external option, except for those that have had to find a workaround and have found a workaround, but it should support multiple displays natively without any hassle. And if you've got monitor goals like Sagi over at Tech Gear Talk, then it sounds like you're gonna need the M1X. We'll of course be testing all of this, but don't hold your breath for DDC CI functionality out of the box. So do expect to still have to manage the volume and brightness on the monitor itself. Frustrating. 3, of course, is the form factor. If you're looking for portability and you're eyeing that 16-inch design, or what I think will be a pretty popular design, and that is the 14-inch model, but if you're into that larger real estate for the screen on the go, and maybe you don't already have the current Intel-based 16-inch, then I can understand the weight. Smaller bezels, mini LED, or whatever iteration they decide, as long as the viewing experience is what we'd expect, including that color accuracy. And for the Mac Mini with those renders, although I do expect those ports to have a little more space in between them because you couldn't really fit 4 Thunderbolt cables so close together. But I do understand that these are just renders from stolen schematics, but moving to a slimmer design does make sense. And even dialing back to some of the older designs and using that plexiglass on the top, because with the Bluetooth issues that were rampant with this device and even with Wi-Fi, it does make sense to not have the entirety of the components be wrapped in aluminum. And speaking of ports, 4 would be more I/O other than the couple of Thunderbolt ports that we have on the M1. And if HDMI is truly coming back as a legacy port, then I know that many of you would appreciate that for the monitors that you currently have. And yes, the SD card slot, as I've said, would be a welcome feature, although could we really calling that a feature is kind of a slap in the face, because if Apple is truly concerned about the environment, whether you believe that or not, but let's say minimalism. Apple is focused on minimalism. And if that's the case, then having the need for no or much fewer dongles would be a welcome return. Although I know that some of us like to still jam in as many peripherals as possible. So I don't think that the market is really gonna go away when it comes to dongles and hubs. And of course, 5, maybe you wanna pare down your hardware and just have one device that you can get some work done and then pivot over to a little gaming. And as much as I've said before that Apple will be getting more involved in the space because where there's green, you'll find Apple. But there's still some work to be done here and a massive amount of money that's gonna have to be thrown at this. And Timmy really needs to just get a few of these players in the space in his pockets, because with Apple pushing metal, this framework hasn't impacted me specifically because of how I use the Mac. But from a developer's perspective, that this will be a hurdle that only if interested in enough money and throwing some muscle behind the Molten VK project that basically maps Vulkan to Apple's Metal API. And there has been some movement with that open source project, but the gaming industry isn't hurting for cash. And whether it's a matter of Vulkan coming out first or Metal being first, although Vulkan is a byproduct of AMD's Mantle API, and that all apparently was wrapped up in a bunch of corporate red tape and at the time and bureaucracy. So that release, or if you want to call it a spinoff, was delayed. And I know that there's a battle between which one was actually first to market, but Vulkan is the industry standard, and Apple themselves doesn't seem to, they really don't want to budge on their API. So it's either going to come down to acquisitions, because I can't see the smaller developers having the resources to consider building on Metal when the console and PC gaming market really, they're flying and they're doing great. But really, is Apple going to have to pivot back to AMD in some way and figure out an equitable solution where they offer a Mac Pro-like design that allows for that customization? And I just want to emphasize here that these GPUs and what Apple is doing is pretty exciting. And I understand the efficiency of TBDR when it comes to the memory bandwidth, but this all really gets lost, especially with gaming, on that loss with blending and shading that requires additional resource. But what it does also come down to here is that everything that you've seen that's awesome about the M1 is really because of the optimization, and we have to be careful when we compare these to PC counterparts for some of those tasks, because this really is not a linear extrapolation. But what I'm basically saying is that you'll likely still need another device for certain titles, as this nut is not going to be cracked within the next year, although I might be. And of course, the last thing that I wanted to cover is that as much as it may seem like some of us here in the tech community are apologizing for Apple, I just want to help you make a more informed buying decision. But I certainly don't expect you to apologize for them if it's not serving your purpose. And as a side note, for future-proofing, I've heard this often. This may also seem debatable because I have several Macs that are a decade old and they still work, but I was also able to upgrade them along the way. And as I said before, my particular workflow hasn't required any workarounds, and I could do an entire video on what the M1 has done for me, including the time and financial aspect. I mean, even separate than some of the videos that I've posted here on this channel. And hey, you do not have to be a business owner to value your own time. When it comes to absolutes, I always recommend tying some level of currency to your time. So for most of you that have the M1, it likely has been a dream without too many hiccups, while others may haven't had such a great experience. And of course, as a side note, Rosetta 2, it's fantastic, but there are still some issues with writing data to the SSD. And Chrome is still a hog with this. And yes, I do know about the caching that occurs, but I've also, as another note, I've upgraded to Parallel 17 and Windows 11, which run great. They really do. But that alone on my developer's beta of Monterey was writing about 50 gigs of data an hour, even when I wasn't actually using it. So we do not need to spend time in the SSD gate conspiracy, but several tests show that I am at about 95% with my internal SSD since when I purchased it last November. But do keep in mind that I'm also running a lot of tests, and some of this is my fault, so it's my own fault. But this does need to be recognized, and whether this is Apple's fault or the software, really it just comes down to apparently the consumer wants this functionality, and Apple is pressuring the industry here, but there are still a few holes to plug because this bucket is really leaking. And if you're curious and you want to nerd out a little bit, you can use something like iStat menu or even run a command within terminal to see what's going on, and I can link up that command in the description below. But whether you're a shareholder of Apple or not, you're still voting with your hard-earned dollar and your time. So if it's not working for you, don't apologize to or even for Apple and take it back, because really Apple's return policy is pretty spot on. So don't hesitate and keep waiting for the software like us fools here on YouTube. Case in point. And so my friends, for those of you that made the M1 decision and it is allowing you to do those things that you want or need, that is completely awesome. You're doing fantastic. You've got a great device. Of course, stay tuned for more and feel free to connect with me here in the comments below or over there on Twitter. You go rock those faces, and I'll catch you right back here on the next one.